I don't know. How can I improve my Wi-Fi at home is a question that I get asked quite often, believe it or not. So I'm making this video to help my friends, family, colleagues, and you, if you're watching, on how to improve your home Wi-Fi, because I know everyone's working from home a lot more now, and the dependency to have a reliable Wi-Fi connection for your video conferencing calls, your gaming, when you're playing online, you want that solid, stable, reliable connection. And if you're live streaming to your favorite streaming platform, you want to make sure that your Wi-Fi is good enough to be able to do that. So if you follow my tips, recommendations, my guide in this video, I'm sure that you'll be able to improve your home Wi-Fi. My first number one tip though is that even if you've got perfect Wi-Fi throughout your whole house, you've got a great signal strength, you've got a really clean Wi-Fi, but you've not got a very good broadband connection, your connection to the internet isn't very good, then guess what? It's going to appear that your Wi-Fi is not very good. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we go for the fastest, but obviously the most, one that you can afford, broadband. If you can go for fiber, then I would highly recommend that. You want to be having a decent broadband speed, be able to handle all of these devices connecting to the Wi-Fi network. So please, first of all, make sure you've got good broadband. Upgrade if you can, but go for the fastest but most affordable for you that you can for your broadband. What's next is that we need to ensure that we've got really good Wi-Fi signal coverage throughout our whole home. And I know typically if you live in a house, when the OSPs install the internet line, it usually goes underneath the stairs in a cupboard out of the way, or next to your TV unit, and then you'll install a nice solid wood TV cabinet and then put the home Wi-Fi router in the TV cabinet. And yeah, it looks great now because we don't really see it. It's tucked away in the cupboard, out of the way, out of sight. But what does that mean for the device? It means that you've got obstacles and obstructions straight away blocking the signal from that device, so therefore it's not going to be able to travel as far. So if this is sounding very familiar for you, then what we need to do is bring that device away out of the underneath the stairs, or put it on top of the TV cabinet. You might want to place this device as central as possible in your home and keep it at least 1 meter away from any obstructions. And this way is going to give you the best chance of this device giving you the coverage throughout your whole home. We may not be able to rely on just having one Wi-Fi device to provide coverage throughout your whole home. If you've got really big, thick brick walls, concrete walls, multiple floors, lots of rooms where you're trying to provide this Wi-Fi to, then just having the one device probably isn't going to be good enough. But how do we check this? Well, I'm going to show you a couple of Wi-Fi scanners you can use on either your Windows laptop or your MacBook to show you how you can check to see what the Wi-Fi signal is from the perspective of the device that you're using. There are Wi-Fi scanners we can get on your mobile devices, especially on Android, but I'm going to be focusing on the Wi-Fi scanners you can get on your laptops. Now, I'm a Mac user, so the first Wi-Fi scanning tool that I'm going to be showing you is only available on macOS. This is also the scanning tool that I'm going to be using in the demonstration to show you how I can check the Wi-Fi signal on my laptop. Don't worry if you're a Windows user, there are Wi-Fi scanning tools out there for you as well. So the tool that I'm referring to for macOS is Wi-Fi Explorer. This is a really, really great Wi-Fi scanning tool that I use all of the time. And I will put links to the Wi-Fi Explorer for the macOS users in the video, as well as for Windows users, the Wi-Fi scanning tool that you can download and use for your Windows laptop. Before I show you the Wi-Fi scanning tool, let's just cover a little bit of Wi-Fi theory so we understand what we're going to be looking at. So in Wi-Fi, we mainly currently use two frequencies, and one's 2.4 gigahertz and the other one's 5 gigahertz. In Wi-Fi, we use channels on these frequencies, and in 2.4 gigahertz, we have 3 non-overlapping channels, and in 5 gigahertz, we have up to 25 non-overlapping channels. Why is this important? Because typically only one device on a channel can transmit at a time. So if you've got multiple devices, multiple access points, Wi-Fi routers, all on the same channel, then lots of devices have to share access to the Wi-Fi. And that's kind of what we want to avoid as much as possible. So just bear that in mind. That'll be a tip that I come to later. But now we are focused on that we've got the 2.4 gigahertz frequency and the 5 gigahertz frequency. And in 2.4 gigahertz, we only have 3 channels that don't overlap with each other. And in 5 gigahertz, depending on where you are, we can have up to 25 channels that don't overlap with each other. Just a couple other characteristics of the different frequencies. In 2.4 gigahertz, we have a lot more non-Wi-Fi devices that work here. So things like baby monitors, passive infrared, Bluetooth, microwave ovens, they all use the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. And therefore, if you've got lots of these devices in your environment, your Wi-Fi will have to compete with these devices as well. There's a lot less of these devices in the 5 gigahertz frequency band. Also, what you might notice is that the 2.4 gigahertz frequency travels farther than the 5 gigahertz frequency. So that might sound better, but what that can actually create is something that's called more co-channel contention or interference or colliding with your neighbors, which is what we want to avoid as much as possible. So let's now take a look for the first time, the Wi-Fi scanning tool, and what I'm going to be using is Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. So I know it looks like there's a lot going on here, but the main thing for what I want you to focus on is to install a Wi-Fi scanning tool. And then what we need to do is take your device to the places around your home where you're actually going to be using the Wi-Fi. Then what I want you to check is the signal strength. So up here, if you can see where my mouse is now, where I've done a filter to show me my signal strength, is showing me my strongest signal first. And now in Wi-Fi, when we're looking at a dBm value, the closer to 0, the better. You're not going to see a signal strength of 0 typically. The best signal strength that you'll probably have is going to be around minus 30 dBm. So what signal strength do we need to have good voice or video calls for the video conferencing that we're doing or whilst we're gaming and streaming? Any signal that you have between minus 30 to minus 65 should be a good enough signal strength. If you're taking your laptop to a position in your home and you're seeing a signal strength that is below minus 65, and you've now moved your home Wi-Fi router out of the understairs cupboard and on top of the TV unit, and you're still seeing that signal strength, then it's time that we now need to invest in more devices to provide better signal strength to where you're going to be using the Wi-Fi. If we have checked on the Wi-Fi scanning tool and the coverage and the signal from the single home Wi-Fi router device you have just isn't good enough, and we've moved it from out of underneath the stair cupboard and put it on top of the TV cabinet, and it's still not the signal that we want, then we're going to have to invest in some more Wi-Fi equipment. Sorry, yes, I'm afraid we are going to have to spend a little bit of money, but don't worry, there are options that we have here, and the typical easiest option that I see a lot of people going for is a Wi-Fi home mesh system. So if we have a look at what some of these home Wi-Fi mesh systems are, if you go onto say Amazon or Google and search for home Wi-Fi mesh, you're going to find lots of vendors offering lots of different options. So we've got Orbi, Amazon, Eero, BT, Whole Home Wi-Fi, Google Mesh Wi-Fi, Netgear, Asus, Linksys, TP-Link. There's loads and loads of options. Another vendor that some of my friends have used, which they really like, is something called Plume. So they've used this in their home, and they're very happy with it. A couple of things that we need to think about when we use a Wi-Fi mesh system. So first of all is your environment. If you are struggling to provide coverage throughout your whole home, and you've got say a more older home where it's like really thick brick walls or concrete walls, these mesh systems, they work over wireless. So if your current Wi-Fi isn't going through the walls you have now currently very well, then there's a good chance that these devices may not be able to do that as well. The other thing to think about when we use a mesh system, each time we get further away from the original device, so say you've got 3 of these Wi-Fi mesh systems, if you're connected to the 3rd one down the line, each hop from the original device, we lose around half throughput. So something else to bear in mind. Typically in most more new modern homes, a Wi-Fi mesh system can be the easiest and simplest solution to fix your coverage issues, but just a couple things that we have to think about. Well, now you're probably thinking, well, what do I recommend then if I'm not going to suggest a Wi-Fi mesh system? Well, the best solution that you could do is to buy some more network equipment that we can then run cables from our home Wi-Fi router to what's called a switch that can provide power over Ethernet, and then from that switch to these Wi-Fi access points that support having cables plugged into them. So this is going to be the most stable, reliable solution you can have for providing Wi-Fi throughout your whole home. But like I said, now there's going to be a couple of extra devices and obstacles that we need to overcome. Number one, can we run structured cabling throughout the house? Is it going to be really expensive? I don't know. It depends on your environment, but that is going to be the best thing that you can do. Reach out to your local building contractor and get a quote to say, hey, can you just give me a quote to run a cable from my cupboard underneath the stairs and run Ethernet cable throughout all of my floors. So then the other devices that we're going to need, what I mentioned, is called a network switch. And that might sound scary and expensive, but again, if we just go onto Amazon and just search for a 8-port PoE switch, and it's important that we do get a PoE switch because we need to provide power over the Ethernet cable. Some of the Wi-Fi access points you go for, they might be able to have power locally from mains, but typically what we want to use is a Ethernet cable that we're already running from the switch to the access point to power it. So if you just look here, for £60 we can get a fanless PoE switch from Netgear. So it's not going to make any noise or hardly any noise, and it's going to be able to power your Wi-Fi access point. So I recommend you go for a solution that you can run a cable to a Wi-Fi access point. Buy yourself a 8-port PoE switch, or if you need more ports, then go for a bigger one. But this is going to be the best option that you can do to provide good, stable Wi-Fi coverage throughout your whole home. Okay, let's say that we've fixed all of the Wi-Fi coverage issues throughout your home. So our home Wi-Fi router provides all of the coverage that we need, or we've bought these additional Wi-Fi devices that provides the coverage. Well, how do we configure the Wi-Fi network now? So my first thing that I want to recommend for configuring the wireless network is to create 2 different SSIDs. So one for your 2.4 gigahertz SSID and one for your 5 gigahertz SSID. Why do we do that? That's because unfortunately there are going to be devices out there that are probably in your home that are just capable of only using 2.4 gigahertz. So probably think of this SSID as your IoT SSID, so things like your Wi-Fi smart lights, your smart hoovers, all of these devices, they're most likely going to be using 2.4 gigahertz. And then for the 5 gigahertz SSID, this is going to be where we want to put all of our corporate devices, our business critical devices, so your work phone, your work laptop, or if you're a gamer, you want to make sure that your console supports 5 gigahertz and it's connected to the 5 gigahertz SSID. And it's a really good way for us to be able to differentiate between the 2 frequencies. So, you know, if you just had the one SSID configured to work on both frequencies, you're probably not going to be able to tell which one's connecting to what SSID. I'm going to show you now how you can configure your home ISP Wi-Fi router. If you're in the UK, it's going to be something like Sky, Virgin, BT, E, something along those lines. But if you're in another country, it'll be whatever's local to you there that you use. But it's going to be a very similar process on how you reconfigure your home Wi-Fi devices. If you've bought some more advanced Wi-Fi networking kit that we spoke about earlier, you'll be able to follow the instructions, log on to those devices and follow the same sort of steps. So I have Sky at home. So what I need to do is I need to connect to the SSID that's being broadcasted from my home Wi-Fi device, and then I need to put in a web browser 192.168.0.1. And if we just take a look at my summary status first of all now, we can see that my wireless is enabled and I've got 2 Wi-Fi network names for my SSID. So one's called MNF2, that's 2.4 gigahertz only, and one is MNF5, which is 5 gigahertz only. So when I open up the network connection settings on one of the devices that I want to connect to the Wi-Fi, if I see that it can only see MNF2, I know that it's only a 2.4 gigahertz capable device, but it can still access the Wi-Fi. And then if you can see MNF5 as well, then I can connect that to 5 gigahertz and I can, make sure this device is connected to the 5 gigahertz SSID. So how do you configure this? Well, on the Sky Hub, once you've logged in, if I go to the advanced settings, if I click on wireless now, so what you would typically see here in the SSID name will probably just be a jumble of letters that came on the back of the box. That's the default. What I recommend, change it to something that you can easily recognize. And then what you want to do is configure it to work on 2.4 gigahertz only. And then if we take a look at my 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi settings, we can see that my name now is MNF, but it's got a 5. So that's how I distinguish and know between the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz SSID. So I really recommend that you do this in your Wi-Fi environment. So the next thing that we need to configure and make a really good decision here is what Wi-Fi channels should my devices be using. And so again, now we're going to go back to the Wi-Fi scanner and we're going to take a look at the environment. So just like in COVID times, we want to avoid our neighbors. We also want to avoid our neighbors' Wi-Fi as much as possible. So if I just open up the scanner tool, and what we can see now, I'm looking at just the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi frequency at the moment. And I live in an apartment where I've got neighbors either side of me, above me and below me. So I can hear lots of other Wi-Fi devices around. And what you can see, if I'm looking at the spectrum view in the Wi-Fi scanner, we can see all of the other 2.4 gigahertz devices that are using channels 1, 6 and 11. So there's quite a lot going on here on 2.4 gigahertz. If we take a look at the 5 gigahertz, and now typically by default, ISPs, they want to provide as much coverage as they can and give you the fastest speeds possible. So what does that mean that they do from a configuration perspective with their devices? Well, it means that they configure them to transmit as powerfully as they can and use as wide channels as they can. So all of the default home ISP routing devices, Wi-Fi router devices, they all use bonded channels in 5 gigahertz. So you can bond your Wi-Fi channels together to get faster speeds, but it just takes up more of the spectrum. And this might sound great, but when you've got lots and lots of devices all on the same channel, and remember, typically only one device at a time can transmit on a channel, that means there's lots of contention. So the quality of the actual Wi-Fi on those channels, if you're trying to use one of these channels, is not going to be great. So what we want to do is we want to have a look at what's going on in our environment and then configure our devices to pick a channel that isn't in use by other devices. So if you can, we want to reconfigure your devices to use a channel that is not in use by lots of the other devices around you from your neighbors. So what you can see here, my devices that I actually use, there's no other devices on these channels. So you can see here, I've got my device, one of my access points on channel 100 and my other device on channel 116. If I come back to the configuring the Wi-Fi home router in my Sky Hub, I can see now for my 5 gigahertz, I can choose my desired channel. At the moment it's set for 80 megahertz wide, channel 36. And then I only have the options between 40 megahertz, channel 36 or 40 megahertz, channel 44. So some of the home ISP Wi-Fi routers, they don't give you the option to configure some of these channels. So this is why, another reason why it might be better for you to invest in some more advanced Wi-Fi equipment so that you can configure and you can use Wi-Fi channels that are not being used by default by all of your neighbors. If you live like on your own, away from lots of people, and you don't have many neighbors around, then you can just use these channels and not have much channel contention. But if you're in an apartment like me, then you're probably going to want to invest in some more Wi-Fi devices. When it comes to configuring your devices for the channel width to use, the rule here is use the widest channel you can until you can't. And what we mean by that is use the widest channel that you can if it's not going to cause co-channel interference with a neighbor. So if you can do that in your, have an 80 megahertz wide channel in your environment and you don't have any neighbors around and it's just you on that channel, then great, by all means do it. But if you have an 80 megahertz wide channel and it now means that you interfere and overlap with 2 or 3 of your neighbors, you're going to be better to move down to a less channel width, but have your own channel, and you will have a more reliable connection for your Wi-Fi. So my last and final few tips. The first one is going to be around if you've got more control over the advanced configurations of the Wi-Fi settings and the data rates, disable the low and legacy data rates. Set either 12 or 24 to be the minimum mandatory data rate. And security, when it comes to the security side of things, change the default login, username and password for your home Wi-Fi device or any of these networking equipment devices that you buy, because just a quick Google search, you're going to be able to find the username and password. For the pre-shared key that you use to access the Wi-Fi, make that be 10, 15 characters long and not a dictionary word. Put some special characters in there so it makes it harder for someone to be able to crack that password. So that's it. That's my recommendations for how you can improve your home Wi-Fi. I know there's such a big demand now to have really good, reliable Wi-Fi at home for our working from home requirements with the video calls. And if you've got gamers at home and the live streaming, if you follow my tips and tricks and recommendations for how to reconfigure your Wi-Fi and how to make sure you've got good Wi-Fi signal throughout your whole home, then this should enable you to have that decent, reliable Wi-Fi connection for whatever you're using the Wi-Fi for. If you like this video and you want some more information about Wi-Fi, we've got tons of other videos and blogs and stuff on our website and on our YouTube channel. So yeah, just check us out, and I hope you liked it. Hope you improve your Wi-Fi. Let me know. Thanks.